welcome back to my channel. This is Regal, the creeper from my videos. It's always like up here looking at me every time I'm doing something. So today I'm going to be talking about bearded dragons and how to care for them. I did this video a while back, like when I first started my YouTube channel. So I thought it was time to do a update video on it, kind of like redo that video and do a better quality video for you guys. So poor Regal, I actually caught him right in the middle of the shed today. He's probably gonna get a bath after this, but he's very gray right now if you notice, and typically he's very yellow with some orange on his back. So he doesn't look like that right now. He's very, very gray, and he's just shedding today. So reptiles are typically more difficult to care for than mammals, and that's, I think, mostly because people can't relate to reptiles as well as they can relate to mammals. And also because reptiles do require more equipment for their care, such as lights, heat pads, things like that. So it tends to be a little bit more difficult. However, bearded dragons are considered very easy reptiles to take care of. Bearded dragons are also really friendly. Typically, they're not going to bite you. My husband's bearded dragon is actually pretty feisty and will bite you, but that's not like common for the species. So typically, they're going to be really calm and nice like Regal is. Just a really sweet animal. Now, bearded dragons are a large lizard. They can reach 2 feet in length. Regal here is a pretty large bearded dragon. There's some that are smaller than this, but he's kind of big for the species. And I wish that he wasn't in a shed right now, because he typically looks a lot better than this, but we just caught him at a bad time. So they're not, of course, you know, the largest lizards. There's a lot of pet lizards you can get that are going to be a lot bigger than this, but they are still pretty big. I mean, they're a lot bigger than geckos, things like that. And typically they live for about 10 years. Now, if you want to get a reptile, I always say that it is important to have your setup ready first before bringing your bearded dragon home, or before bringing any reptile home. You should have the setup ready first. Now, adult bearded dragons need typically about a 40 to 50 gallon tank, and that's the size you know you're going to use when they are full grown. If you have something bigger than that, that's great, but that's generally the size you want to go with. If they're younger, if you have a baby bearded dragon, you probably want to put them in a 20 gallon tank. You want to make sure that it's not a huge tank where they're not going to be able to find their warm spot. They're not going to be able to hunt their food. So that's why you don't want to go with a really big enclosure for a baby. But of course, it could just depend on the reptile that you have. Regal's actually been in a pretty big enclosure since he was a baby, but I did take him out for feedings. I did make sure that he, you know, could find his warm spot and move around the tank, but I was constantly watching him and sometimes moving him around myself. So if you want to make sure that they're able to do that without you being there, then get a smaller enclosure for a baby. Now, one of the most important things that you need to buy for your bearded dragon is a UVB light. So this helps them process vitamin D, and it just, you know, keeps them healthy. It's something that they can't live without. Outside, they would be soaking up the sun, but inside they can't get the sunlight even through a window. Even through a window, the rays that they need is not going to pass through glass. So you do need to provide the UVB light. Now, if you do not provide a UVB light, they will develop metabolic bone disease. This is where they're not able to process calcium, they're not able to process their vitamins, and they become deficient, and basically their bones and skeletal structure start deforming. And so this does lead to death. So UVB lights, that is not an option when caring for these guys. It is essential to their care. Next thing to talk about is the heat light. Now, these guys are from a very hot climate, so they do need a basking temperature of about 100 degrees. Now, the entire enclosure does not need to be 100 degrees. It can be 100 degrees right in their basking spot, and then a cool side of about 80 degrees. Now, the nighttime temperature can drop to about 65 degrees. If it's any lower than that, you do want to provide a heat source during the night. I don't have to provide any heat sources for them at night since my house never even gets near that cold. And also, if they're babies, you probably don't want them getting down to 65 degrees. Regal is just not having it with me today. Their temperament does change a little bit when they're shedding, and I think he's just not comfortable right now, so poor guy. How about some food? No? No. Do you want one of these? Now, humidity is typically something you don't really have to worry about with these guys. A humidity between 40 to 50% is going to be just fine, so that's your typical indoor humidity, unless you're in a very humid climate. then sometimes people have to put fans on them or something like that in order to try to decrease the humidity. But usually the humidity is just fine. It's not like other reptiles where you need to spray them or anything like that. You don't want it to be super humid for them. So humidity under 50% is ideal. All right, so I guess he's gonna sit over there now. So next, let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, substrate. So this is one thing that's, don't jump down someone's throat if they have their bearded dragon on sand. And I know the keyboard warriors are just going to be going crazy right now in my comments, but sand is not something that is going to jump out and kill a bearded dragon. It's just not. And I think it's so crazy how much stuff there is out there on the internet of people talking about sand and just immediately being like, oh, your bearded dragon's going to die. You put him on sand, he's just going to flop over dead tomorrow. And it's not true. Sand can impact a bearded dragon. Impaction is what kills a bearded dragon. Now, sand isn't going to jump out and kill your bearded dragon. The bearded dragon has to eat the sand, become impacted, and then die from it. Now, typically, bearded dragons die from impaction because of bad care. That is the main reason. It's not having all of the right, temperatures, humidity, everything like that. That's why they get impacted and die. Now, as for sand, now if you have a bearded dragon in an enclosure with sand and you're feeding him in there and he's chasing crickets and ends up eating sand like that, yeah, that is an issue. So instead of getting crazy and being like, oh, you have your bearded dragon on sand, it's gonna die. First, you should ask them, hey, how do you feed your bearded dragon? Do you feed him in that enclosure? And then if they say yes, then that's probably an issue and, they can become impacted and die as a result. But everybody who has their bearded dragon on sand it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I have my bearded dragon on sand. I know a lot of you know this. If you're new to my channel, you're probably leaving right now. But let's talk about this, so hear me out. So I've had Regal on sand almost since I got him. Pretty early on, I realized that Regal was not going to be able to hunt his own food. He was just not going to be able to catch a cricket. And that's just how he was. So since I wasn't going to be feeding him in his tank or even feeding him anything that was going to be running around his tank, I decided to try some sand in, an area of his enclosure. His enclosure is not all sand. He has different types of substrate. And so he loves it. He loves the sand, and that's where he sleeps. So I'm not going to take his sand out of his tank just because some people get really offended and want to write nasty comments on my videos. That's how he's happy. Now, the other bearded dragon that we own has never been on sand. It has a completely different enclosure, but also is a completely different animal compared to Regal. Animal care is not always black and white. So it's really important to figure out what's going on, why someone is doing something with their pet before basically going on a witch hunt for them because they use something that you think is bad. So personally, I like sand for my bearded dragon. If you're someone that wants to dump in some crickets into their tank and not have to worry about it, then don't use sand. Personally, I think that the best thing for reptiles is bioactive enclosures. Now, Regal's not an animal that I want to put in a bioactive enclosure. In case you didn't notice, I was saying he can't catch insects. That's not normal. So he's special, and sometimes your special reptile shouldn't go into bioactive enclosures. So he's not in that type of enclosure. My other bearded dragon is. It's a really amazing enclosure, really cool with plants. She can dig in the dirt. It doesn't have sand, it has soil. So if you do want to check that out as an option for a bearded dragon, then be sure to watch here. For my bearded dragon, I like to use reptile carpet. I like reptile carpet, but it does get really gross and you have to replace it often, and that's one of the things that's not cool about it. He has rocks, logs, there's some sand in an area. Tile's something you can use, but don't use a tile that's going to be very slippery. That's not good for their joints. So just make sure that it's not something they're going to be sliding all over. But the really important thing to remember here is that loose substrate is not what kills a bearded dragon. It's bad husbandry. Now another thing to also mention here, and you'll probably see this if you watch my bioactive videos, is don't, bring home your bearded dragon and immediately put it into a bioactive enclosure. You need to put it in quarantine. You need to make sure that it doesn't have mites. You need to make sure that it's completely healthy before putting it in bioactive. So once you have an area set up and ready for your bearded dragon, then you can go out to the store and purchase one. So you want to just make sure that the one that you pick out is active, alert, looks healthy. There are tons and tons of color morphs to choose from with bearded dragons. And so it just, depends on what you want as to how expensive it's going to be. You can get a bearded dragon from anywhere between $35 to probably a couple $100 depending on, what kind of color morph it is. And then there's also, the normal bearded dragons as far as, their scales go, which is what Regal is, or you can get like the leatherbacks, the silkies, all of that. Personally, I don't like that. I like the dragon look of these guys. I think it's really neat. I don't like silky bearded dragons. I think they look very unhealthy. I think they just look weird. But if that's what you're into, then just, make sure you pick out a healthy one. Now, as far as food goes, they actually eat a big variety of food. So as they're babies, they're going to be eating more insects and then a little bit of greens. So it's going to be about 65% insects and then the rest fresh vegetables and things like that. And then it kind of switches when they're adults and they're going to be eating mostly vegetables. A baby bearded dragon can eat insects about 3 times a day, and they probably won't eat their salad every day, whereas adults will eat a salad every day and you can feed them bugs maybe twice a week. It is also possible to just keep the bugs to once a day. I know it's probably pretty hard for most people's schedule to be feeding a baby bearded dragon 3 times a day. That's what I did with Regal. I think it was pretty beneficial for him. But you just have to see what works for your bearded dragon. Now also the amount of insects that you're going to be feeding depends on the size of your bearded dragon, because a baby is, anywhere between this big to, a lot larger than that. So I think with Regal it was about 10 dubia roaches when he was a couple weeks old, and it just kind of increased from there. Now you just want to make sure that the width between their eyes is how big the insects are that you're feeding them. You don't want to feed them something that's too large, and you also don't want to feed a baby bearded dragon superworms. You can feed babies crickets, dubia roaches, mealworms, things like that, but you do want to wait to feed superworms until they are larger so that they can actually crush the whole superworm and the actual head's not going to go into their stomach and bite them. That's something that can happen. So that's why you wait until they're older to feed them superworms. So it's really important to feed them a big variety of greens. I know a lot of people say that they have trouble getting their bearded dragon to start eating greens, and it is kind of hard to get them started at first sometimes, but just keep offering them food, offer them different things. Sometimes they have a little bit of a sweet tooth, and you can try apples, and that's something that will start getting them into their salad. You don't want to feed them tons of apple slices, but it's something that you can mix into the salad to get them to start trying something new. Alright, another hot topic is spinach. Now, you're going to hear a lot of people tell you that spinach is something that you cannot feed to bearded dragons, but rarely will they ever tell you why. So the reason you don't want to feed spinach to a bearded dragon is because it actually keeps the body from absorbing calcium, which calcium is really, really important for reptiles. However, feeding them spinach once in a while is actually very good for them because it does have vitamins and minerals that other leafy vegetables don't have. So spinach is not something you want to include in the salad every day, but if you feed them spinach like once a month, they're going to be perfectly fine and it is going to benefit them. Now when it comes to watering your bearded dragon, some bearded dragons will drink from a bowl of water, some won't touch it at all. He's pretty much just like tossed his food like everywhere. That did not keep his attention at all. Okay, so Regal does not have a bowl of water in his cage. He won't touch it at all, so there's just like no point. The other bearded dragon we have actually drinks from a bowl of water regularly, so they're both completely different, as you can tell from this video. Now, the way that Regal will get his water is right now in a few minutes when I give him his bath. He will actually drink water from his bath. And that's pretty much the only way that I can get him to drink water. But don't be too worried of your bearded dragon not drinking water. If they don't drink any water, just give them baths regularly, like once every 2 weeks. and then also just provide them with their salad daily, and that'll be a lot of their water intake will be through their salad. So don't worry too much if they're not drinking a lot. They can stay hydrated by eating their salad. Thanks for watching this video. I hope it helps you get started in caring for your bearded dragon. If you do have questions about bearded dragons, please leave them in the comments down below. And don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to see more of my pets. And subscribe if you're new. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!